with us, have you?
No, I haven't.
And I'm not sure we have ever met. Maybe across a room or something?
One time along.
For years, people assumed there had to be tension between Lee Van Cleef and Clint Eastwood. After all, both became icons of the Western genre. Both shared the screen in some of cinema's most legendary films, and one eventually became a far bigger star. But just 6 years before his death, Van Cleef finally revealed what he truly thought about Eastwood, and it wasn't what most people expected. His comments pulled back the curtain on their relationship, their careers, and the quiet truth behind one of Hollywood's most misunderstood partnerships. How Lee became a war hero. Clarence Leroy Van Cleef Jr. came into the world on January 9, 1925, in Somerville, New Jersey. Born to Marion and Clarence Sr., he grew up in a home shaped by deep Dutch roots. But long before audiences knew him as the cold, calculating bad in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, he was just a Jersey kid who made a bold decision, walking away from high school to put on a Navy uniform and head straight into World War II. And he didn't just serve, he and his crew earned their place as decorated war heroes. To really understand how serious that is, you have to picture what they were dealing with out there. German U-boats. These submarines were the nightmares of the Atlantic. The Nazi fleet built nearly 1,200 of them, sending them prowling along the eastern coasts of the United States and Canada, picking off merchant ships like predators in open water. In 1942 alone, just 16 U-boats managed to sink nearly 80 ships off the American coast. Over 1,000 merchant marines lost their lives in those attacks. The situation got so bad that Allied forces had no choice but to rethink their entire strategy in real time. So they adapted fast. They launched aggressive bombing raids, sometimes wiping out multiple submarines in a single day. They organized merchant ships into heavily guarded convoys, making it much harder for U-boats to strike. That shift forced the Germans to change tactics too. Instead of going after protected fleets, they started hunting isolated vessels. Any ship moving alone became an easy target. It turned the ocean into a deadly game of cat and mouse, and Lee Van Cleef was right in the middle of it. He enlisted in the U.S. Navy in 1942 at just 17 years old. His first assignment put him on a submarine hunter, a ship built specifically to track and destroy anything lurking beneath the surface. It carried a 40mm gun and twin 20mm cannons, serious firepower for a young sailor stepping into war. For about 10 months, he lived that life, chasing shadows in the water. Then came his transfer to the USS Incredible, and that's where things escalated. During the Allied landings in southern France, Van Cleef and his crew found themselves facing near-certain danger. Stationed just off the coast of German-occupied territory, the Incredible came under direct attack from enemy forces. This wasn't training anymore. This was survival. On September 10, 1944, while clearing mines to make way for Allied troops, the ship ran into one of the strangest and most dangerous weapons deployed by the Germans: human torpedoes. These were small, manned underwater crafts designed to sneak up on ships, attach explosives to the hull, and escape before detection. Van Cleef and his crew spotted the threat and reacted instantly. What followed was pure chaos. Tense, life-or-death scramble as they tried to stop the incoming attackers. Out of 12 human torpedoes sent their way, they managed to destroy 10, but 2 slipped through. Those 2 made contact, they latched on, and they detonated. The explosion hit hard, but the Incredible refused to go down. The ship absorbed the damage, held together, and after quick repairs, went right back into action for the remainder of the war. It lived up to its name in every sense. As for Van Cleef, his actions during that moment of chaos didn't go unnoticed. He was awarded the Bronze Star for his bravery under fire, a recognition earned long before he ever stepped in front of a camera. How one role changed everything. After his time in the Navy, Lee Van Cleef stepped back into civilian life and took whatever work he could find. He landed a job on the massive estate of Doris Duke, but like a lot of veterans trying to find their footing, he had to hustle. Days were spent grinding at a factory, while nights were dedicated to working as a public accountant, just trying to stay afloat. Then, in 1947, something shifted. A friend involved in a small amateur theater group suggested he give acting a shot. It wasn't some grand plan. It was more like a nudge in a new direction. Van Cleef joined the troupe, and before long it became clear he had something different. By 1950, that quiet experiment turned into a real opportunity when director Joshua Logan brought him on for the national touring production of Mr. Roberts. A couple of years later, everything changed again. In 1952, he landed a role in High Noon, a film that would go on to become one of the most iconic westerns ever made, sharing the screen with names like Sheb Wooley, Bob Wilk, and Ian MacDonald. Van Cleef played Jack Colby, one of the four outlaws waiting for the final showdown. The story itself followed Marshal Will Kane, played by Gary Cooper, as he faced a brutal decision: run and save his life, or stay and confront a gang of killers. The tension builds in real time, ticking down to that inevitable moment at noon. At the time, the film stirred controversy because of its underlying political themes, but over the years, it earned its place as a true classic. Van Cleef didn't have many lines in the film, but he didn't need them. Sitting there, calm and watchful, smoking and playing the harmonica, he created a presence that was impossible to ignore. There was something in his stillness, something in his eyes. It told you everything without saying a word. That quiet intensity became his signature, and even in a small role, it was obvious he had the makings of a Western legend. That performance opened doors, but it didn't make life easy. Throughout the 1950s, Van Cleef stayed busy, taking on role after role in both television and film. Most of the time, he was cast as the villain, and he leaned into it. In 1957, he crossed paths with Kirk Douglas in Gunfight at the OK Corral, only to meet a brutal end. A few years later, he shared the screen with John Wayne in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, where he once again played a member of an outlaw gang. That film, starring both John Wayne and James Stewart, wasn't just another Western. It challenged the way people thought about the genre, digging into the idea of how legends are created and remembered. At its core, it explored how truth can get blurred over time, turning real events into larger-than-life stories. Even though Van Cleef's role as Reese was smaller, his presence added to the grit and realism that made the film stand out. For more than a decade, he became the face audiences loved to hate, standing tall at 6'2", with a lean frame, a gravelly voice, and a stare that could cut right through you. He fit perfectly into the role of the outlaw. Hollywood saw that and kept putting him in the same box. And that was the problem. The work never really stopped, but it rarely moved forward. Year after year, he found himself playing variations of the same character, the forgettable bad guy, in dusty, low-budget westerns. The pay wasn't great, and the roles weren't getting any better. Behind the scenes, the grind was wearing him down. At one point, industry insiders even suggested he change his appearance, fix his nose, soften his features, if he wanted a real shot at bigger roles. Van Cleef refused. Instead of changing himself, he walked away. He left acting behind and picked up a paintbrush, starting an interior decorating business to support his family. Money was tight. Between small residual checks, unemployment support, and his wife Joan's income as a secretary, they managed to get by, but just barely. It felt like the curtain had closed on his acting career for good. By the late 1950s, things got even worse. A serious car accident in 1958 nearly took his life and left him with a permanent knee injury that caused constant pain. On top of that, rumors about his personal struggles started to spread. The roles had dried up, the money was thin, and the future didn't look promising. At that point, Van Cleef was done with Hollywood. Then came one of those moments that feels almost too perfect to be real. One day, he got a call from a man asking to meet at a hotel. Van Cleef assumed it was for a decorating job, so he showed up prepared, measuring tape in hand, ready to talk paint and furniture. But the man he met wasn't a client looking to redecorate a room. It was Sergio Leone. Leone had been watching Van Cleef's old performances overseas and saw something no one in Hollywood seemed to value anymore. He didn't see just another background villain. He saw presence, intensity, and a face that could tell a story all on its own. And for once, he didn't want Van Cleef to play just another disposable bad guy. In April 1965, Van Cleef signed a contract that paid him more than he had ever earned before. He was cast as Colonel Mortimer in for a few dollars more, stepping into a co-starring role that would redefine his career. This came right after the unexpected success of A Fistful of Dollars, Leone's gritty, low-budget western that introduced a new kind of style. Shot in Spain, backed by European funding, and starring a relatively unknown Clint Eastwood at the time, it flipped the traditional western on its head. Where American westerns had started to feel predictable, Leone's version was something else entirely: raw, violent, stylish, and unapologetically cool. For the sequel, Leone needed someone who could match that energy. Someone who didn't need long speeches or dramatic monologues to command attention. He needed a face that could carry weight in silence. And Lee Van Cleef, after years in the shadows, was finally about to step into the spotlight. But believe it or not, before Lee signed onto this project, he hadn't stepped onto a film set since 1962. By that point, his career wasn't just quiet, it had practically gone cold. So when the opportunity finally came, it didn't feel like just another role. It felt like a restart. And the way it came? Straight out of a movie itself. Instead of a contract and a promise, they showed up with a briefcase holding $10,000 in cash. No delay, no paperwork games, just money, right there in his hands. Lee didn't waste time. He drove straight to his agent's office, peeled off the 10% cut, then headed home. Now here's where it gets interesting. His wife, Joan, had no clue any of this was happening. No heads up, no warning that something big was about to change their lives. Lee walks in, calm as ever, says nothing, and tosses a thick envelope of cash toward her. Mid-air, the rubber band snaps, money spills everywhere, bills floating down, covering the floor like a scene out of a dream. Joan just stood there, stunned. The shock hit her all at once. She started laughing, then crying, then laughing again. It didn't even feel real. In fact, she had to count the money 4 separate times just to convince herself it actually was. Just like that, everything shifted. 2 days later, Lee was on a plane to Italy. No easing into it, no slow buildup. Cameras were rolling almost immediately. In for a few dollars more, Clint Eastwood returns, this time as a bounty killer forced into an uneasy partnership. The target is a dangerous outlaw known as El Indio, and the man he teams up with is just as deadly, a rival hunter named Colonel Mortimer. That role belonged to Lee Van Cleef. Mortimer isn't loud or flashy. He's controlled, precise, and carries himself like a man who's seen too much. An aging soldier with a sharp mind and a saddlebag full of weapons, he operates with a kind of quiet authority that makes people uneasy before he even speaks. His introduction says it all. He's sitting on a train, face hidden behind a Bible, dressed entirely in black. Someone mistakes him for a preacher. Then he lowers the book, and those cold, piercing eyes tell a completely different story. He's not there to save souls. He's heading to Tucumcari, and he's there to collect bodies and the money attached to them. Van Cleef plays him like a gentleman with a dark edge. Every move is calculated, every shot feels inevitable, but underneath that calm exterior, there's something deeper driving him, something personal. El Indio isn't just another target. He's the man responsible for the assault and murder of Mortimer's sister. That pain sits just below the surface the entire time, and it finally erupts in the film's final moments. Mortimer finds himself disarmed, staring straight into Indio's gun. Then comes the pocket watch, a small, haunting detail stolen from his sister. As the music plays, it pulls everything back to the surface. The loss, the anger, the years of carrying it. And you can see it all in his face. No words needed. Back in Italy, the film didn't just succeed, it exploded. Box office records fell, and suddenly, an entire wave of films followed in its wake. They'd soon be known as spaghetti westerns, and right at the center of it all was Lee Van Cleef. Overnight, he wasn't just working again, he was in demand. But the question lingered. Why him? Why did Sergio Leone choose Lee Van Cleef for Colonel Mortimer? The answer wasn't what you'd expect. According to Van Cleef himself, Leone admitted it had nothing to do with his acting. The moment he saw him, he knew that was the face. That was the man. It was instinct. Van Cleef took it with a bit of humor, even if it stung a little. He joked about it later, pointing out that actors like to believe they're chosen for their talent, not just their look. Still, that look became unforgettable. The very next year, he stepped into an even darker role in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. This time, he wasn't a man with a code. He was Angel Eyes, also known as Sentenza, a character who didn't just bend morality, he erased it. The film brings him back together with Clint Eastwood and adds Eli Wallach into the mix as Tuco, the unpredictable wild card. Together, they move through a brutal, dusty world driven by greed and survival. And Van Cleef? He becomes the embodiment of something colder than greed. Angel Eyes is a corrupt Union sergeant who doubles as a hired killer. Unlike Mortimer, there's nothing refined about him. His clothes are worn, covered in layers of dirt that feel permanent, like the desert itself has claimed him. But it's not the look that defines him, it's the presence. Every word he speaks feels deliberate. His voice is dry, almost lifeless, like it's been stripped of anything human. There's no hesitation in him, no doubt, just purpose. He carries out violence with a calmness that makes it even more unsettling, wearing a faint smile that never quite reaches his eyes. They call him Angel Eyes, but there's nothing angelic about him. And yet, off-screen, Van Cleef had his own line he refused to cross. No matter how dark the role, he set clear boundaries. He wouldn't threaten a child, he wouldn't kill an animal, and he wouldn't murder a woman. It didn't matter who the director was, even someone as legendary as John Ford. Those were his rules. Aside from a single rough scene involving a dance hall hostess, he stayed true to that code throughout his career. He built a legacy playing some of the coldest men in cinema. But even then, there were limits he refused to break. He could play the devil better than most, but even the devil, in his version, had rules. The villain became the star. After co-starring in Sergio Leone's The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly as the unforgettable Angel Eyes, Clint Eastwood made his long-awaited return to Hollywood. Lee Van Cleef, on the other hand, stayed right where the momentum was, in Italy. And it made perfect sense. Over there, he wasn't just another working actor. He was a star, front and center, with his name carrying real weight. Back in the United States, he had spent years being overlooked. In Italy, he was finally getting his due. So he leaned all the way in. By this point, Sergio Leone's Dollars trilogy had already taken over the world. What started as a bold, unconventional take on the Western had turned into a full-blown global movement. And for Lee Van Cleef, it changed everything. The same Hollywood that once overlooked him could no longer ignore what he brought to the screen. That quiet, unshakable presence that didn't need noise to command attention. Studios in the United States started paying closer attention, and before long, he found himself stepping into another familiar Western formula, drawing inspiration from films like The Dirty Dozen, where criminals are pulled together for a greater cause. The Magnificent Seven ride arrived in 1972, and this time Van Cleef was front and center. He was older now, no doubt about it, but if anything, that only added weight to his performance. His version of Chris Adams wasn't just a lawman, he was a man shaped by years of hard decisions. There was no softness to him, no hesitation. He believed in justice in its most final form. In his mind, the men he executed would never harm anyone again, while those shown mercy often proved that mercy wrong. That belief defined him. If the job needed doing, he wouldn't wait around for someone else to handle it. He'd saddle up and take care of it himself. It gave the character a harder edge than before, and it fit Van Cleef perfectly. Nearly a decade later, in 1981, he stepped into what would become his final major role in John Carpenter's Escape from New York. This time, the setting had changed completely. The dusty frontier was gone, replaced by a bleak, futuristic city turned prison. But Van Cleef's presence? That stayed the same. He played Hawk, a police commissioner tasked with controlling chaos from behind a desk, yet still carrying the authority of someone who understood violence firsthand. Across from him was Kurt Russell as Snake Plissken, a defiant outlaw with nothing to lose. What made their dynamic so interesting was the respect behind the scenes. Russell had grown up watching the westerns that made Van Cleef a star, and he brought that influence directly into his performance. There's a clear echo of Clint Eastwood's style in Snake, controlled, quiet, dangerous. And that was no accident. It gave the film an unexpected connection to those earlier westerns, even in a completely different setting. On screen, Snake might come across as the toughest man in the room, but when he stands face to face with Hawk, there's a subtle shift. Van Cleef doesn't try to outmatch him physically. He doesn't need to. One look at his face tells the story of a man who has already seen every kind of threat imaginable. When Snake pushes back, even threatens him, Hawk barely reacts. There's a calmness there, almost like he's entertained by it. It's the kind of moment that reminds you exactly who you're watching. When the cameras stopped rolling, Van Cleef's life slowed down in a different way. He turned his attention to painting, focusing on portraits and figure work. This wasn't just a casual pastime, he had real skill, and over time, he managed to sell a number of his pieces. It became a quieter outlet for the same intensity he brought to his roles. His personal life told its own story. He married his high school sweetheart, Patsy Ruth Cayley, back in 1943, and together they had 3 children, Alan, Deborah, and David. That chapter eventually came to an end, and in 1960, he married Joan Drain. That relationship lasted until 1974. 2 years later, he married Barbara Havalone, who remained with him through the final years of his life. For someone who built a career playing hardened, dangerous men, the version of Lee Van Cleef at home was very different. According to his son Alan, he wasn't strict or overbearing. He didn't play the heavy. That role belonged to their mother. Lee himself was known as easygoing, warm, and far removed from the cold figures he portrayed on screen. Then, in December of 1989, his story came to a quiet end. He had been dealing with heart disease for some time, and late on the night of December 16th, he suffered a seizure at his home. He was taken to a hospital in Oxnard, where he was pronounced dead shortly after midnight. He was 64 years old. Today, his legacy is captured in the simplest way possible. At Forest Lawn Memorial Park, where he was laid to rest, his headstone carries a short but fitting tribute, "The Best of the Bad." Lee Van Cleef shared his real thoughts on Clint Eastwood 6 years before death. For decades, Lee Van Cleef carried one of the most unforgettable faces in cinema. The sharp cheekbones, the narrow eyes, the cold stare. He could walk into a scene and instantly shift the entire atmosphere without saying a word. He looked like danger before the audience even knew his character's name. But behind that legendary screen presence was a man who understood Hollywood with surprising clarity. Late in life, Van Cleef spoke openly about the actor most closely tied to his legacy, Clint Eastwood. A lot of people expected bitterness or rivalry when the subject came up. Instead, what they got was honesty. Calm, thoughtful honesty. To Van Cleef, the public had always misunderstood their relationship. People liked the idea of turning them into competitors, two gunslingers battling for the spotlight. But from his perspective, it was much simpler than that. They were just two actors whose careers crossed paths at exactly the right time, each bringing something completely different to the screen. Van Cleef openly admitted that when Clint Eastwood arrived in Italy to make those westerns, he already had momentum on his side. He was younger, fresh-faced, and carried a kind of natural confidence that cameras seemed to love instantly. But what impressed Van Cleef most wasn't Eastwood's looks or popularity. It was his restraint. He noticed how Clint understood the power of stillness. While many actors tried to dominate scenes with movement or dialogue, Eastwood did the opposite. He slowed everything down. He stayed calm, patient, almost motionless at times, and somehow that made people watch him even more closely. Van Cleef believed that kind of screen presence couldn't really be taught. Either an actor had it or they didn't. When the two first worked together on For a Few Dollars More, Van Cleef said it became obvious almost immediately that Eastwood was becoming something bigger than just another movie star. There was an energy around him that people could feel. The crew noticed it. The audience noticed it. Clint wasn't simply playing a cowboy anymore, he was building an icon in real time. Still, Van Cleef never viewed that rise as luck. He understood how carefully Eastwood crafted his image. Every quiet pause, every calm stare, every moment of silence was deliberate. Clint protected that image fiercely because he understood that those traits weren't just performance choices, they were the foundation of his entire screen persona. At the same time, Van Cleef knew his own road looked very different. While Eastwood fit naturally into the image of the modern American hero, Van Cleef represented something else entirely. He understood that the audience looked at his face and saw danger, suspicion, a man who might betray you the second you turned your back, and he accepted that completely. Instead of fighting against it, he learned how to turn it into his greatest strength. He didn't need audiences to trust him. He just needed them to remember him. That became the key to his entire career. For Van Cleef, his unexpected rise in Italian cinema proved there wasn't only one path to stardom. He didn't need to be the clean-cut hero riding off into the sunset. His place was somewhere murkier, living in the shadows between good and evil. And honestly, that's where he thrived. He also rejected the idea that Eastwood somehow overshadowed him. If anything, Van Cleef believed their differences made both performances stronger. In his eyes, the tension between Eastwood's cool, controlled hero and his own morally gray gunslingers gave those Leone films their magic. Without contrast, those stories wouldn't have worked the same way. Off-screen, he had enormous respect for Eastwood's professionalism. According to Van Cleef, Clint always came prepared, respected the craft, and treated the work seriously. For Lee, that mattered more than ego or celebrity status ever could. But what really stands out is the way Van Cleef viewed legacy itself. He understood that Eastwood eventually became larger than life, not just as an actor, but as a director and filmmaker. Meanwhile, his own legacy settled into something quieter, more mysterious. And he was perfectly at peace with that. He believed people remembered him differently, not necessarily for speeches or grand heroic moments, but for smaller things. The eyes, the walk, the silence, the feeling he created when he entered a frame. To him, that kind of memory mattered just as much. Van Cleef also had a deeply realistic view of Hollywood. He understood how quickly the industry could build someone up and move on to the next big thing. Fame was loud when an actor was young and new, but eventually all of that noise faded away. And when it did, only the truth of the work remained. That was the part he cared about most. In the end, his reflections on Clint Eastwood never turned into some dramatic rivalry story. There was no resentment hiding underneath the surface, no bitterness about who became the bigger star. Instead, there was understanding. Van Cleef believed Clint became exactly the kind of legend he was meant to become. And in his own way, Lee Van Cleef became exactly what he was meant to be too. They were never supposed to be the same man. One represented the calm hero standing in the light. The other carried the danger lurking in the shadows. Together, framed against dust, silence, and blazing sunlight, they created one of the most unforgettable partnerships the Western genre had ever seen. And in the end, it was left to the audience to decide which legend stayed with them most.